A quiet step through Rock Hill. The rooftops were lower here. Gwen sat cross-legged on the edge of a narrow brick church in downtown, maybe 3 stories up, high enough to be out of sight, low enough to hear conversations float up from the street. The night air in Rock Hill was warm and humid, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and distant rain. Her fingers rested on the rough edge of the ledge, brushing flaked bits of old red paint. Below, the streets buzzed with quiet life. Downtown Rock Hill wasn't sprawling or loud, but it pulsed gently. People slipping in and out of narrow shops, restaurants pushing golden light through glass windows, footsteps echoing down brick walkways lit by globe-shaped lamps. Music drifted from somewhere, a slow blues guitar crackling from a live band tucked behind a screen door. It reminded her of home, not perfectly. The buildings were shorter, the skyline humbler. No screaming sirens, no looming towers, but there was something about the way the streets twisted through old storefronts and late-night diners that stirred her memory. She'd walked streets like these in Queens, tight corridors of energy and routine. People weaving their stories into the bricks without even realizing. Here, though, everything felt softer, slower, like the town exhaled with every porch light and every screen door that creaked open and shut. Gwen adjusted her hood and tilted her head slightly, watching a young couple walk out of a corner ice cream shop, laughing, arms tangled, sharing a spoon from a paper cup. Across the street, an older man closed the shutters on his hardware store, whistling faintly through his teeth. The night didn't need her, and she liked that. She was just a shadow tonight, a quiet presence perched above a small town that didn't know she was there and didn't need to. She dropped from the rooftop as easily as a leaf falling from a tree, light and effortless. Her ballet shoes touched down in the alley behind a bakery that smelled faintly of yeast and powdered sugar, then carried her down the sloped sidewalk toward the softer part of town. Rock Hill had its rhythms. Traffic at twilight, a lull between dinner and the late night hush. But just a few blocks off downtown, the city opened up into something slower, something older. Gwen followed the familiar curve of Charlotte Avenue. The old weather asphalt and cracked sidewalk led her on a path past the old white home and the convenience store across the road from it. She passed neighborhoods and old auto shops that seemed to be trapped back in the early 90s before crossing over Dave Isle. She walked until the noise dimmed behind her. Gwen observed the cozy, quiet neighborhoods. To the outsider passing through, they might look forgotten and run down, but they had a welcoming charm to them. Just beyond the intersection of North Wilson and Charlotte Avenue, Glencairn Garden waited there like a secret someone left unlocked. She stepped through the open gate. Spring had touched everything. Azaleas bloomed in bursting pinks and reds. Tulips swayed like dancers in the hush of evening. And the low hum of frogs and insects sang from the edges of the water. A winding brick path led her past a trickling fountain and under dogwood trees whose branches arched like cathedral ceilings. She moved without sound, her white hood a soft ghost among petals. There were only a few others nearby, a woman sitting on a bench reading a paperback, a jogger slowing to a walk, a small child pulling his father's hand toward the koi pond. No one looked up. No one noticed the figure in black and white slipping between trees like a thought half remembered. Gwen breathed in deeply. The air here felt different. Not cleaner, not crisper, just more still, as if the world paused for a moment so the flowers could finish blooming. She passed beneath a row of cherry trees whose petals had begun to fall, blanketing the brick wallway in delicate pink confetti. She knelt briefly beside a bed of violets and ran her fingertips along a fallen petal. The color reminded her of her mask's lining, a detail no one ever noticed but her. She smiled behind the fabric. There was no rush, no call for action, just this garden, this moment, this quiet. A part of her wanted to stay longer, to find a bench in the shade and melt into the rhythm of frogs and breeze. But she knew herself too well. Gwen was a visitor by nature. She passed through places like a breeze between pages. Still, she lingered. Near the center of the garden stood a gazebo, its wooden slats painted white and soft with age. Gwen stepped inside and sat on the railing, one leg pulled up beneath her. The pond nearby reflected the early stars, and in the stillness, she felt herself become part of the scenery, something not to be watched, but to watch. Her thoughts didn't race, they wandered. She thought of the tulips that would wilt by next week, of the jogger who might run this path again tomorrow without knowing who passed him tonight, of the boy by the pond and how he would remember the koi more than anything else from his walk, of how some places don't need stories, they are stories. She stayed until the breeze cooled and the first moths began flitting under the lamplight. Then, just as quietly, she slipped back onto the path, the spring petals swirling faintly around her ballet shoes. Glencairn didn't notice her leave, but she would remember it. Gwen stood alone at the heart of Glencairn Garden. Around her, spring had unfolded like a secret being told in slow motion. The garden was alive with softness, petals opened wide beneath the evening light. Birds called from the tops of trees, half drenched in blossoms. And the slow burble of a nearby fountain layered itself under the hum of insects and wind. She stood beneath a flowering cherry tree, its branches arched above her like a ceiling painted in pink. Her suit, sleek, shadowed in white and black, reflected the garden's gentle hush rather than broke it. The white shimmered faintly under the overhead lamps, not glaring, not sterile, more like ivory paper turned in soft hands. Her sides were banded with jet black, the lines curved like brushstrokes. Inside the hood, just barely visible in the low light, the rich blush of magenta framed her cheek like a halo drawn in reverse. Her ballet shoes touched the brick path as lightly as petals landing. They weren't designed to stomp, to crash, to leave dents. They were meant to move like breath, to turn rooftops and alleyways into dance floors. Here, among the flowers, they made even less sound than usual. A single pink blossom brushed the toe of her shoe, catching for a moment before the breeze took it again. The garden didn't see her as a visitor. It treated her like a passing ghost. She tilted her head slightly, watching as a dragonfly hovered in front of her chest, curious, silent, suspended. Then it darted upward, past the branches, vanishing into the pink canopy. She breathed in once, slowly, filling her lungs with the scent of rain on petals and fresh mulch. She let the air hold inside her for a long moment. Then she turned toward the path, quietly. No rustle, no declaration, just a soft press of a slipper on brick, and the whisper of her silhouette folding into the trees. Behind her, Glencairn Garden remained. A page turned, and the story moved on. Leaving Glencairn was like surfacing from a dream. The farther she walked, the more modern the world became again. Street lights, signage, glowing. The street lights had vanished as she found herself walking down Cedar Street. She passed an old warehouse behind a rusty chain link fence. She now walked down a dark back road, the woods to her left and a railroad atop a hill to her right. A few deer grasped at the edge of the woods as she passed them. Abruptly, Cedar Street ended next to a few houses, but the train tracks continued. Gwen crossed over them and continued walking past a few office buildings and a small distribution center, with a brick chimney raising up with the city's name. Chimney, a relic of the building's past. Dave Lyle Boulevard stretched wide and slow beneath sodium lights. Traffic moved in predictable flows, clean headlights, orderly left turns, the occasional pulsing thump of a subwoofer from a passing car. It was all familiar in a way, but gentler than Queens. Less armored, less impatient. The Civitas statue near Tech Park stood on a small rise overlooking the street, set back slightly from the sidewalk, framed by shrubs and a low iron fence. Gwen approached it quietly, her hands still buried in her sleeves. The bronze figure gazed into the distance, frozen in mid-thought, arms over her head holding up a bronze ring. Gwen looked to each corner of the intersection. Each had its own statue, a bronze goddess atop a granite ball holding a ring over her head. She circled the base slowly, the gravel crunching softly beneath her boots. A few feet away, a small garden had been planted. Early marigolds and daffodils just beginning to open beneath the street lamp glow. The flowers hadn't quite woken yet for the season, but they were trying, stretching, reaching. Gwen stood beside them for a while, the statue to her left, the boulevard unspooling to her right. She didn't think of her life in pages or headlines anymore. Not here. She thought in quiet moments. Blooming flowers, soft gravel, a small city remembering its own. She didn't need to leave a mark here, just pass through, like the wind. Gwen slipped between two of the statues into the edges of Tech Park unnoticed, her presence blending into the shadows as she walked in the grass beside the road. The sharp lines of glass buildings stood tall around her, modern, silver gray, and closed for the day. Their windows caught the reflections of street lamps and the last remnants of dusk, shimmering like water. But she wasn't here for the buildings. She crossed a narrow footbridge and stepped onto the path that circled the large pond at the heart of the park. The water was smooth and still, touched only by the soft glide of birds, mallards and geese drifting lazily beneath the lamplight. A few ducks nested on the far bank, heads tucked into feathers. One goose stood upright near the shoreline, its chest puffed like a sentinel, watching her without alarm as she passed. Gwen slowed her pace. Her ballet shoes clicked softly on the path, softened by the spring breeze and the hum of cicadas rising around her. Lights along the pond's edge cast warm halos on the surface, reflecting the ripples of the birds as they shifted, dipped, and murmured among themselves. She stopped near a bench, resting her hand on the cool iron armrest. A single duck quacked once, flapping its wings in a sleepy burst before settling again. Tiny bubbles rose near a patch of reeds, catching the light like pearls. This place had a different kind of stillness than Glencairn. Here, the quiet came from glass walls and empty lobbies, the hush of water and machinery at rest. Even the geese moved slower, as if they knew the world had put itself to sleep. Gwen sat for a moment, her posture relaxed, elbows on her knees as she watched the ripples fade across the pond. The geese made low, muffled sounds. Nothing urgent, just the chatter of twilight. A mallard dipped its head under, then popped up, droplets scattering off its feathers like sparks in the lamplight. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. But it was real, present, enough. She stood, gave one last glance across the water, and continued along the path, her silhouette stretching across the pavement beside her like a second shadow. The pond behind her faded into the glow of distant windows and sleeping birds. And ahead, the night stretched on, gentle, inviting. Books A Million came into view like a lighthouse at the edge of a dark parking lot. Set low between chain stores and office facades, its green awning and gently glowing sign felt like something out of the early 2000s. Familiar, untouched, enduring in a quietly stubborn way. Gwen smiled faintly as she crossed the sidewalk and slipped through the front door. The bell gave a soft chime that barely echoed. Inside, the air smelled of paper, old ink, and coffee, sugary syrups, and vanilla beans mixed with the faint musk of mass market fiction. Only a handful of people wandered the aisles. One couple whispering over a travel guide, a man leafing through a Civil War history book with a coffee in his hand. She made her way past rows of spines without looking too closely. The fiction section still had the same display racks she remembered from when she was 16. Those square stands that spun when you nudged them. She gave one a gentle push. It creaked lazily in reply. At the back of the store, the cafe waited like a warm, sleepy corner of someone's house. No music played, just the hum of lights and the faint click of a laptop keyboard somewhere near the sugar station. The barista gave her a nod, half-lidded and easygoing. "Anything in particular?" he asked. Gwen hesitated a second.
Chamomile, if you got it.
"We've got it." The transaction passed quietly, cash exchanged without much eye contact, like they both knew this wasn't about the drink. It was about the warmth. Tea in hand, Gwen made her way to a corner seat near the window. The view wasn't anything special, just a parking lot, a few tired trees and cement planters, and a strip of Dave Lyle Boulevard stretching out beneath the stars. But the chair was soft, the light was dim, the tea was hot. She pulled her hood down and exhaled. Steam curled around her face like a sigh she hadn't known she was holding. She sipped the tea slowly. No sugar, no lemon, no honey, just warmth, just stillness. A book lay open on the next table over, someone's forgotten mystery novel. Its pages flipped to the middle like it had been abandoned mid-chapter. Gwen reached over, gently flipped it closed, and left it there like a stone skipping across a quiet pond. Outside, the boulevard moved on. The city didn't need her tonight, and that was fine. She looked down at the soft swirl of steam rising from her cup. Here, in this corner, under the lights of a quiet bookshop, Gwen Stacy was just a shadow, resting in the warmth. Just a breath between places. Just present.